Today we're looking at a video called 5-Minute Quranic Proof: How the Universe Confirms God's Existence by a vaguely gnomic Muslim educator called Yusuf Mullen. And this is a segment of a video lecture, which itself is half an hour long, but this was uploaded as a separate video because it's just that good. It's got to be seen on its own. For some reason, since I found it relatively recently, it's been unlisted for reasons that I can't find stated, but whatever, I'm not tossing the video away just because of that. And the video it comes from is still public, so whatever, I guess.
Allah merges the night into the day, as a result of which the day becomes longer, and this happens in summer. And Allah merges the day into the night, as a result of which the night becomes longer, and this happens in winter. So why is Allah drawing our attention to the length of the night and the day?
Alright, so first off, I'm a big appreciator of the room you're in. Very nice. But so this is a reference to various verses in the Quran: 22:61, 31:29, 35:13, 57:6, which talk about Allah merging the day into the night and the night into the day. Which, without you telling me that that's supposed to be about summer turning into winter or winter turning into summer, I would assume is just about day slowly fading into night or night slowly fading into day. That's also a merge. Either way, though, why is Allah drawing attention to it? Because he's saying, I'm really powerful, I make the sun go up and down. Or in your idea, I'm really powerful, I make the seasons happen. I think my interpretation is much simpler, and it matches up better with what he says next, that he's subjected the sun and the moon, each orbiting for an appointed term. Orbit, of course, being an inappropriately modern word, but the term here is a day. The sun does its orbit, and then the moon does its orbit, or their passage across the sky. It seems to me it's pretty clear-cut that this is what it's talking about, but either way, it's just saying for the millionth time, Allah's super powerful, so do what he says. It's the same as pretty much everything else in the Quran. It's just endlessly reiterating, he's really powerful, he's so powerful, like so powerful, he's so powerful. It's the same reason why, in the same areas of the book, it says Allah makes the wind and the clouds and the human reproduction and all the crap you can dig out of the water to eat and make jewelry out of. And he makes the rain and he keeps the sky from falling down, because it's a dome, of course. And he makes ships able to float on water. Anyway, question answered, I guess. No need for the rest of the video, but I suppose I might as well let you talk.
Because the night needs something to make it night, and the day needs something to make it day. So this dependency, we have a name for it, we call it contingency. So everything in the universe is contingent.
Hold on a second. Are you telling me that when the Quran's like, Allah makes the sun go up, Allah makes the sun go down, that's not just about the sun going up and down? It's an argument from contingency? Okay, so you're just reaching for anything to make this seem more impressive than what it actually is, huh?
And that's what it means for the entire universe to proclaim the transcendence of Allah. What it means is that since everything in the universe is dependent, and its dependency cannot be removed except by something that doesn't share that same dependency, so that's how we know that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the one that's making everything the way that it is.
Well, okay, if you want to make an argument from contingency, that's fine, but your assertion is that those verses from the Quran make that argument, which they obviously do not. You're trying to inject arguments into the Quran's argument-free rambling about how Allah makes the sun go up and down. Look, if the Quran's so great and makes all these great arguments, show me a place where it actually made them. Why do I care what arguments you come up with? You're not Allah. You're not gonna do a better job showing the reality of Allah than Allah himself. If he wanted that argument in the book, it would be in the book. And if he didn't want it there, it's because it sucks. Alright, I listen to Allah.
Okay, so by virtue of its contingency, the universe reveals a being that is not contingent, a being that is independent, a being that doesn't depend on anything while everything depends on it.
Okay, well, personally, I find these contingency arguments debatable at the best of times, but assuming, just for the sake of argument, that things that you see around you being contingent imply the existence of something non-contingent, how does that get you to what you said, which is that you know that Allah specifically is the one making everything be the way that it is? Like, sure, maybe you only see one option to fill that slot because in your world there is only one option. But that's just your lack of imagination, which has nothing to do with anything. Regardless, though, pointless topic because that is not what the day and night thing is talking about, and I don't really think any contingency argument is explicitly laid out anywhere in the Quran. You're saying it's implicitly laid out, but your example doesn't establish that. If there were such an argument, that wouldn't exactly be amazing or anything, but pretending the argument's there when it's not is less impressive still. But if the day and night thing were in fact supposed to be explicitly a declaration that day and night are contingent, and therefore that Allah is necessary, that's still not an argument, that's just an assertion. Kind of like the stuff with Allah makes the rain fall, Allah makes the sky not fall down. Like, these are not arguments. These are assertions. They don't argue for anything. They don't go from a premise to a conclusion. They're just stating a conclusion.
Okay, now what we ponder in the universe, in addition to contingency, what we see there's variety. So everything in the universe is variegated, and there's no two snowflakes that are exactly the same, and there's no two grains of sand that are identical.
Okay, well, those are complex objects made of many particles. Why do you choose those for examples rather than, say, quarks? That being said, yes, as far as macroscopic objects go, there's quite a low statistical probability of those objects having the exact same configuration of particles. There is indeed variety in the universe. The nature of physical processes is that they produce variety, typically. It would be highly statistically improbable for it to be otherwise. Just based on what physical reality is, you would expect it to be extremely improbable for physical processes to produce identical snowflakes or identical grains of sand. That would simply not be realistic. That would go against all observations of how nature works.
So what does variety reveal?
Nothing. At least nothing relevant to this conversation.
Variety reveals that the necessary being on whom the universe depends freely chose to make everything the way that it is.
Ah, I see. No, it doesn't at all. Why would it reveal that?
Because if we, for a moment, assume that fire burns.
Assume.
Like, we know it doesn't. We know that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala does the burning.
Do we? How do we know that? Is that another thing the Quran just says?
But if we were to assume that it's fire that does the burning, then fire is a non-volitional cause. Non-volitional cause. In other words, fire doesn't choose to burn.
Maybe it does. How do you know? Well, because obviously Allah makes the choices, so the fire can't. Is that it? Okay, and what if you drop that assumption? What if you drop the assumption that the only possible answer to every question is Allah? What does the world look like then, in terms of possibilities? A whole lot different, I would say.
Fire doesn't choose to burn, it produces a single effect.
You're trying to paint that as a dichotomy when it's obviously not. Either fire makes choices or it produces one effect. Each one of these can be true or false independently of the other. Also, I would say that depending on your parameters, fire produces many effects. What is the basis for this one effect only idea? Especially considering that before you defined snowflakes having some amount of variety from each other as therefore being different effects and therefore being volitional, not produced by mindless physics, but manually produced by God. And the same for grains of sand. But for some reason, fire's different. Fire has some kind of single effectiness. The insane amount of different stuff that happens when a piece of wood burns is one effect only. But two snowflakes that have slightly different branches from each other, that gets to be variety.
And if there was a hypothetical fire, that if you were to walk up to it and put your hand in it, your skin would burn. And then someone else would come and walk up to that same fire, and instead of their skin burning, imagine that it would freeze. And a third person would come and walk up to the fire and put their hand in it, and magically, what would happen is that person would start aging. And they'd age like 2 decades within a few seconds. And a fourth person would come and they would age backwards and they'd become like a child or a baby by putting their hand in that fire. If that were to happen, you would assume that the fire is alive.
What? Why? No, I wouldn't. I wouldn't think that at all. I'd be like, wow, this is a weird phenomenon. This produces strange and inconsistent seeming effects. I wonder how this works. This has happened all the time through the history of science. There is so much stuff that seems weird and inconsistent and incomprehensible that we just tried to figure out how it works, and then we did. But let's say that we never could. Let's say there was no consistent physical basis to this. There was no way to reach an answer to this scientifically. Let's say it really was, as you said, magic. Literal magic that is inexplicable and also produces truly random results. Okay, why would that mean it's alive? That would mean it's magic and random, but magic and random are not equivalent to alive. You're just making up ideas by building them on top of constraints and assumptions that you also just made up.
Okay, agree? Think about that.
Yeah, I thought about it. That's why I don't agree.
You would have, yeah, because non-volitional causes, they don't create variety.
Why? What justification do you have for that statement?
What you associate with a non-volitional cause is the same effect, a single effect.
No, that would be what I would associate with a simple, predictable physical system. Simple in the extreme, I mean, to the point that it only ever does one thing, which would be actually really unusual. Fire definitely would not qualify. But of course, there are physical systems which are neither simple nor predictable. And that's assuming it's physical at all in your example. Again, it could just be totally random magic. None of this clearly implies that we're dealing with a living thing that's making choices. You just want your audience to leap to that conclusion because you said so. You must have learned how to make arguments from the Quran. Just make a blunt assertion and pretend it's one. If anything, though, it seems like what you're trying to say is that something must be volitional if its effects can't be summed up in like one common human word. But if it can, then it's non-volitional. How else are we counting effects, if not just by whether they have one word to describe them? That's the only way in which fire could possibly be said to have only one effect. Burning! There, fire has one effect. It can be described with one word that a toddler knows, and therefore by linguistic magic, we've taken the objectively vast array of various effects of fire and transformed them into just one. Which, if that's the simplistic level you are in fact operating at, as I think you are, that could be applied to literally anything. For example, God created the universe. Universe is one word. If there's one word for it, it's just one effect. God only produces a single effect, which is associated with a non-volitional cause.
And you can't choose whether to produce that effect or not produce that effect. It will happen all the time.
Okay, something happening all the time or not happening all the time is not the same as choosing or not choosing. Those are completely different concepts. They can apply separately. You're treating them as identical, but why? Just because you want to? You keep talking about two totally different things as if they're the same thing, without even seeming to notice that you're doing it.
Okay, so when we look at the universe, do we see a homogeneous blob, or do we see variety? So clearly there's variety.
Okay, and because none of your premises or assumptions are justified, that doesn't mean anything useful to your argument. And really, you have no argument. You might as well just come out and say, I think God did it, because that seems to be all you actually want to say. The actual making of the argument and justifying your premises and stuff doesn't even seem to enter your mind as something important. Now, I thought maybe, because this is a smaller part of the longer lecture, that he talked about this earlier in the lecture. But no, actually, this clip is pretty close to the start of the video. It's like 2 minutes in, where it starts. He basically just introduces what the talk is about, and then goes right into this stuff. So yeah, his video contains no justification for any of this. This is all just taken as obviously true.
Another analogy is that if you go into a department store like IKEA, and you visit the kitchen section and you look at all of the plates, you'll notice that they're identical. They're exactly the same.
No, they're not. If you ever tried stacking them, you'd know that. Yeah, they're as identical as people can manage to make them by making machines intentionally designed to make them as identical as possible, but they're not identical. That's obvious enough most of the time just by eye, but if you were to look at them on the microscopic level, it would be much more clear that they're not the same at all.
The reason they're exactly the same is because they're produced by a machine.
Okay, that's not a property of machines, like as a universal rule, making everything exactly the same. That's a property you attempt to give a machine, designed to make things the same. And even then, they're not the same. Uniform output of manufactured products is something that people have to work really hard to achieve. And even still, they cannot achieve it to perfection. Reality is the opposite of what you're saying. Of course, this is all totally irrelevant anyway, because the universe is not a machine, and it doesn't really function that analogously to the type of machines that you're thinking of. You know, machines that manufacture macro-scale objects just by moving matter around. The design of those kind of machines completely ignores so much of how the universe actually works. Stuff that's just not important to the functioning or the design of that particular machine to achieve the purposes of the people making it, but stuff that nevertheless exists, even within that machine itself, including so much that is so not like the basic mechanisms that people were trying to compare the universe to like 300 years ago because they didn't know any better. For example, the probabilistic nature of quantum mechanics, which produces variety of a type that you apparently won't acknowledge.
By a non-volitional cause, like a machine, and a machine can't produce variety.
Where do you get these nonsensical ideas? You just spit out these things that are obviously false as if they're obviously true.
And there's no purpose, and it can't choose.
Okay, well, as far as current day machines go, it depends on your definition of choose. For all intents and purposes, it can. Of course, there are machines with output that gives the appearance of choice, and I don't see why true choice, as in the machine itself having an internal sense of will, would not be possible. That's again just you saying things. But considering right now, you're sitting in front of a machine that produces various outputs, while you talk about how no machine can produce various outputs, and all it can do is repeat the same identical output over and over, is kind of hilarious.
Right?
No, why would that be right? That's obviously ludicrously wrong.
And if you go into an artist studio and you look at all of the pieces of art that are decorating the wall, what you'll see great variety. And you'll see purpose and you'll see design, because all of that is produced by an agent.
I want to take a look at a clip from later in the video and then a comment with, I think, great relevance to what you've just said. Here's the clip.
Having created the heaven and the earth, he didn't disengage and wind it up as a clock so that the universe is running itself. No, that's wrong. But instead, everything within the universe, from the time it was created, and from there on, and at every moment subsequent to the creation of the universe, it is Allah who governs the universe, and he governs it continuously, and he governs it in a scientifically coherent way.
Right, so the universe is not functioning on natural laws. It's not set into motion by God and then God lets it take its course. God is controlling every part of it all the time. Although, interestingly, all of that time, he chooses to govern things in only one way, which is a scientifically coherent way. In other words, no appearance that there's anyone there making any choice that things should operate in a way that's inconsistent with naturalism. There's no variety. It doesn't appear naturalistic one day and then supernatural the next. The choice of how things will work is always the same, to the point that it doesn't seem like there's a choice being made at all, leaving the door open to terms like laws of nature. Which is interesting, that my view of the universe, that it appears non-volitional, apparently is kind of your view as well, that the volitional cause is nonetheless producing a single effect, which is a scientifically coherent universe. The only effect of even that volitional cause, in any circumstance, is the single physically expected outcome. Now, for additional context, here's the comment I was talking about. This is replying to someone on this video. God governs the universe in a scientifically coherent way. The natural process themselves aren't doing anything. The problem is you're projecting onto our arguments Christian intelligent design reasoning, which is all flawed. The reason is Christians are soft materialists. They believe the laws of nature are real, so they need to argue for God by trying to show places where science can't explain something. So according to them, either it's fully explained through the laws of nature, or an intelligent designer did it. This is not our position. So you see what I'm saying? There are no laws of nature. God does literally everything all the time, but he just happens to do it in a way that looks like laws of nature. It looks scientifically coherent, and he does this reliably all the time. To the extent that, for example, like you said, if you pretend that God isn't doing the fire, or doing the burning, the fire looks entirely non-volitional. But of course this applies to everything. If you don't assign this volitionality to it for no reason other than you want to, it doesn't look volitional at all. It looks scientifically coherent and like a natural process, which you have to explain away by just saying, well, God decides to act in a scientifically coherent way. And of course this incredibly weak excuse about, well, there's variety, which doesn't even address this issue, but I guess it makes you feel better. But then you give this example of going to an artist's studio and seeing the clear products of a volitional agent, which are so distinct from everything else, which doesn't show that, and it sticks out like a sore thumb. So basically what I'm saying is, you're telling me to look at how obviously distinct works of art produced by an agent are from everything around them, in that they show clear intent, unlike everything else, and then you just sort of assert that everything else must also have clear intent, despite not showing the same signs, which is why you used this example at all. Now, of course, having said all that, saying this in the AI age, when machines can convincingly produce these seemingly intent-rich, various results, despite not being able to produce variety at all, apparently, is more than a little bit funny. Another thing that's funny is this other comment you left on the video where somebody says, "What a complete mashup of nonsense arguments." And you say, "Actually, it was extremely eloquent." I'll leave that up to the audience, how eloquent this absolute stuttering mess of a video is.
So again, when we ponder the universe, the first thing we see, the first thing we know intuitively, is that all of these things could have been some other way. So therefore, they need something to make them the way that they are. And this need can only be satisfied by something that doesn't have the same need.
Okay, so now we're back to contingency, which again, I'm still granting for the sake of argument, that and the idea that there has to be some necessary thing, because it really doesn't matter. If there needs to be something, if contingency implies the existence of some necessary thing, that doesn't tell you what the thing is. And of course, religious people are going to try to argue that it must be some thinking, willful God, but I don't see any other arguments supporting that, and thus far in this video, you don't really seem to have tried to argue for that anyway. So far, all you've done is assert that that's the answer, which is pointless. You might as well not even bother talking.
There are people that have a statement, somebody that doesn't have something can't give it to someone else.
Okay, God doesn't have contingency, so where'd the contingency come from? And if you think that's flippant, okay, probably it is. But then ask yourself what the point was of saying that saying at all in this context.
And the next thing we see is variety. What does variety reveal? It reveals about the necessary being on whom the universe depends, that he freely chose to make everything the way that it is, because non-volitional causes cannot produce variety, they can only produce a single effect.
Okay, nothing else to say about that. Completely stupid, unjustified statement. And of course, that's assuming that I even acknowledge the equivalency between variety within the universe and the idea that the universe itself is a various effect, that is not a single effect, which is by no means granted. That's the fallacy of composition. Consider that you said that a machine can make plates. Well, a plate is not a uniform object. It has variety all through it. It is not one atomic entity with no internal variety. Well, neither is the universe. But that doesn't mean that the universe itself is various effects, any more than the plate itself is various effects of the machine. You don't think that the machine can produce various effects, so you agree with this. The outcome of a single effect can have variety within it. And then, of course, also there's the thought that the plate itself is the only effect of the machine, without acknowledging, for example, the heat generated, the sound, all these other effects that are obviously produced by the machine while it's producing the plate, and then all of the cascading effects that will happen as a result of that plate being manufactured by the machine. Because the fact that the machine made that plate will have cascading effects throughout the entire future. Matter and energy have been rearranged. Things will never go back to how they were, and therefore the fact of that plate coming into existence as a consequence of the mechanical operation of the machine will have an endless cascade of effects. And likewise, if you have a universe originate for whatever reason, why would you not expect the same endless cascade of effects? That seems to be how things work. It's not necessarily that whatever necessary thing at the start caused the origin of the universe itself caused all the variety within the universe, but rather it could be that it instead caused a very simple original state, which after billions of years of runaway cascading effects led to the variety that we see now. There are plenty of ways to think about this that you're just not thinking about. Which, not to read too much into it, but that might have something to do with the fact that you're the kind of guy who thinks fire doesn't have an effect, and only Allah causes the burning, and presumably the machine doesn't have an effect, only Allah makes the plates, and there's no room for any other possibility anyway, so why invest any thought into it?
And then when we look, third time, when we look at the universe, we see design and we see purpose.
Well, we do, because that's how we think, because we're a hypersocial animal primed to see the universe the same way we see other humans. You seem to talk a lot about intuition. A lot of what you say is just, this is obviously true just because it seems true. Intuitively, it feels true. Sounds about right. I don't know. Makes sense to me. Okay, but your willingly sloppy interpretation of reality isn't necessarily reality.
What do we mean by design? Design is a feature of contingent things. That the necessary being has determined the thing to be in a particular way so that something else can happen.
Okay, that's a whole lot of stuff that supposedly we just see. Now apparently the definition of the word design involves ideas of contingency and necessity, and the idea that everything was made by one necessary being. I would find this to be an extremely controversial definition of the word design. You're just kind of mashing whatever you want in there and hoping nobody cares. Well, I care, and if you're gonna do that, then I definitely do not see design in the universe.
So when we look at the human eye, for example, there's a lens. So when we ponder that there's a lens in the human eye, and we ask the question, why is there a lens?
Because the organisms that had that survived and reproduced more easily than the ones that didn't.
So clearly, it's in order that the light that comes in can focus in on the retina to allow a person to see.
No, that's what the lens does. That's not why there's a lens. The question, why is there something, is not the same question as what does the something do. They're very clearly different concepts. There's no reason why these can't have separate answers. In fact, it makes very little sense for them to have the same answer. Why is there a lens that focuses light onto the retina and allows you to see? Well, of course it's so that there's a lens that focuses light onto the retina to allow you to see. Well, that makes no sense. You've answered a question about the origin of something by just explaining what the something is a second time, which is why even in your religion, this is not the actual answer that you would give. The answer Islam would give is God wills it so. That's the why.
So there's a purpose there behind that, right?
I mean, I don't think so, but even if I did, that doesn't make it obviously true. If you say it with no justification, it's unjustified, which is fine at times. It's just you're acting like it's obviously justified already when you haven't even tried.
So what does design reveal? Design reveals that the necessary being on whom the universe depends produces tremendous knowledge, will, and power.
Just randomly say that out of the blue? Cool, why not? Do you not notice that you're just saying disconnected things as if they should follow from what you said previously?
In other words, وَهُوَ الْعَزِيزُ الْحَكِيمُ. In other words, he's the almighty, the all-wise.
Okay, tremendous knowledge, will, and power would not be almighty and all-wise. Even that is just disconnected words that in no way follow from what you said previously. They're about the same subject, mind, power, but you've horribly overextended. You've gone from very powerful and very knowledgeable to almighty and all-wise. Now, at least might could be taken as synonymous with power, but wisdom is in no way synonymous with knowledge. Knowledge is what you know. Wisdom is about applying what you know to your life in a meaningful way. You can have all knowledge and still be unwise. And since wisdom is about how you operate in relation to things that you don't control, I don't think it's even compatible with being almighty, especially in the incredibly absolutist way that Allah is, where literally everything that ever happens is in his complete control because he's a being of infinitely potent will, and nothing can ever go wrong for him or pose any difficulty for him. Wisdom does not apply here.
So can you see that this small little sentence,
which means whatever is in the heavens and the earth glorifies Allah, for he is the almighty, all-wise. This is the verse that prompted him to bring up the other stuff.
Is alluding to those two arguments that I just mentioned right now, the argument from contingency and also the argument from design?
No, it's not alluding to any argument. It's a blunt statement about how Allah is awesome and everything is for his glory. It's the same as all the rest. Again, you're trying to read arguments in, to put them in Allah's mouth. They're not here.
So this is what we mean when we say these arguments are literally on every page in the Quran.
Because the Quran's always talking about how awesome Allah is? Cool. Doesn't lead to the conclusion you want, no matter how many times you just insist that it does. Alright, that's that. That's the whole clip. I'll be back filmed soon. I've just had a house guest for the last couple weeks and it just doesn't work. It's also been blisteringly hot and I've been sick. I'm falling far behind, it really sucks. So we'll get all that stuff out of the way. I'll have an empty house, it'll be cooled down, I'll be healthy, and then I'm gonna catch up as quickly as I possibly can. Anyway, subscribe, see ya.